This week on Win Today.
He rejected my show. And it comes at me, and I don't want to be rejected, and I've been rejected. And it sucks.
Yeah, it does.
But what do I have to do in that moment? I have to shine the light of truth on my feeling, which isn't a fact.
It's our limiting beliefs that ultimately keep us from becoming the best we're capable of becoming. Something's got to change, but that change has to happen first on the inside. I don't want to wake up in 5 years and say, how did I end up here? It's time to get unstuck. It's time to get your why back. It's never too late. Let's start today.
Helping you design your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. This is Win Today. And now, here's your host, Christopher Cook.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for the download. This is episode 94. This is Win Today, your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. We've got a good one today, folks. Here's what's going down on this week's show. Ken Coleman, host of the wildly popular EntreLeadership podcast, as well as the Ken Coleman Show, is here to talk about his book, One Question. You know, folks, in his career, Ken has interviewed many of the greatest influencers of our generation. So today we're going to take a deep dive with him into why our ability to ask quality questions has a huge impact upon our personal and professional development. And then later in the conversation, Ken is going to help us break down and identify the construct of limiting beliefs that keeps so many of us from stepping out past fear and into the unknown, which is the place where our dreams and aspirations reside. Folks, I really hope you lean into today's conversation, take some notes, and expect to apply everything Ken talks about to your life today. And then right after my conversation with Ken, my friend George Wells from the Elevate Your Impact podcast is here with this week's Mentoring Minute. But guys, before we get going today, I want to take another step forward to adding value to your life, to helping you. So as I mentioned last week, I have a call-in number that's available for you right now. Here it is, 248-266-2945. That's 248-266-2945. I want to answer your specific questions about emotional health and relationships, getting past the past, personal growth goals, getting unstuck, putting a plan on your dreams, and everything in between. Listen, if you have a question, someone else probably has the same question, so let's tackle this thing together. I'll air your question on the show and bring clarity to whatever you're facing. But without further ado, let's get right to it. Here's my conversation with Ken Coleman. Well, Ken, you've been a huge inspiration to my own work. This is a real treat. Thanks for taking the time to be here with me today.
Well, I'm thrilled, Chris. Appreciate you having me.
You're welcome. Well, Ken, today we're talking about something that I know is so near to your heart. And I really believe you hold a powerful key to jump-starting all of our potential, and that's the ability to ask quality questions, because we don't know what we don't know. And so I think the advancement of our potential and our careers and our aspirations is held in our ability to ask and extrapolate and seek wisdom and understanding. So Ken, let's back up. Let's talk about your own journey, what you've learned, and how it led to this successful career in broadcasting today.
Well, it started for me at 16. The answer to that specific question there was high school chapel. State Senator Mark Earley, who went on to become the Attorney General of Virginia, was speaking that day. And I always had a good amount of ambition, and I had a natural love of history. And it's interesting, when you're ambitious and you appreciate history, you find yourself drawn to great men and women who have done great things because you're intrigued by them and you really emulate them. And so I was always that kid. And then so I'm 16, and to make a very long story short, he preaches that day on your purpose and the call of God in your life. And I just sensed it was probably an overwhelming ambition that was speaking through my immature heart. But I just really sensed that God was calling me that day to a public call. I thought it was to run for office, political office down the line. But that was the moment where I really did have a great sense and confidence that I was supposed to be a public communicator on some level. Certainly a public figure, I think, is how it started for me, but I always enjoyed the stage. I enjoyed the microphone, always a bit of a ham, to be honest, and a performer as a kid. We all know kids like that. You see them at like 5 and 6 and you go, they're fearless. They just, as many people as they can have looking at them at once, that's their whole goal. And unfortunately, I was that kid. Thank God for maturity and good people in your life that knock all that nonsense out of you. But that's where it started for me. And then the journey, as I began to walk it out, what I believe God was calling me to do, and got into politics, and then felt like I had to get into the private sector to have more of a resume that would allow me to run for office down the line. And as I began to just, again, walk that path, God began to, as he does, and this is my theology, I believe this, that as we step out into the unknown in faith, God then steps in and steps up for us. Because the Bible says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. That's a pretty clear sentence. There's no error there, and there's no room for misinterpretation. Yeah. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. So what that says to me, Chris, is that God's saying, you step out so that you don't get any credit and glory, because we all know, if we go back to Genesis, the reason we were created is to glorify the Father, to glorify him with our works. Yeah. So I stepped out, and God began to manipulate and maneuver things in front of me, beside me, around me, and eventually I was challenged again to step out and go into broadcasting, having thought for the majority of my life that I was setting myself up to run for office and be a political servant, civil servant, if you will, to my country. And now all of a sudden it's, whoa, this is weird. I don't have any education in broadcasting. I don't have any experience, but this is where I'm supposed to go, and started, from scratch. And I'll just, leave this to you. You can take us where you want to take us. But that starting point for me, I'm very proud of this, because I want people to grasp it, that where I started was doing high school football play-by-play on the internet, and 2 people were listening. My wife back at home, because she's a great woman, wow, and then the dude next to me in the booth, So, the small beginnings, the humble beginnings, that's not just good, motivational poster content. That's really where it starts for most people.
Well, that's right. And, Ken, what I hear through that is your heart and your passion to connect. John Maxwell actually says this, and I know you worked with John. He says, everyone communicates, but few connect. And this is where the focus of our conversation comes in today, Ken. We're talking about asking quality questions. So I guess the simple question is, why is question asking such a necessary skill in life?
Because if you're not learning, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're slowly dying. So if you believe that sentence to be true, then what's the source of learning and growing? It's questions, period. And that's why questions are so necessary. If you're going to be a great leader in business, a great leader in education, you're going to be great at your role. I don't care what role. Yeah. I don't care where you are in the world. I don't care what position you're in. If you want to be effective, just think about this for a moment. You've got to be effective in asking questions. And a lot of people aren't, and thus the mediocrity that we see and the frustration. Yeah. Any man or woman who is intentional about asking questions in their life, their professional life, their personal life, their spiritual life, their health life, if you're asking questions, then you are going to be by nature learning, and those who learn now have the option to grow. You don't always have to do anything with what you learn. You should be, but you got a 50-50 chance in my mind of being successful if at least you're learning. And again, back to asking questions. That's why questions are so important.
That's really good. Well, I want to, I suppose, dive even deeper into that, Ken. You wrote in your book, good questions inform, but great questions transform. And I'd love for you to just unpack that for us in terms of even our own development and relationship skills.
Mm-hmm. Well, a good question informs, great questions transform. That quote, that just came from me writing that down one day when I was writing the book. Yeah. Because I was basically doing an analysis in that first chapter of the book as I was explaining how questions can literally change our life. And so a good question gets me the information I need. That's what that means by good questions inform. Yeah. I need to know something, so I'm going to ask a question that is good enough to extract the answer that I need. Great. That's a good question. But a great question can literally change your life. And what I'm saying there is that's going another level. That's going deeper. And if you think about the soul-searching questions that people have, if you ask the questions that get you the answer to a soul-searching, a deep, life-changing issue, whether it be money, again, spirituality, faith, the physical. I mean, listen, you think about that, it can literally, you get the answer, and if it changes the way you think, it's going to change the way you feel. And if it changes the way you feel, you're going to act. And so a great question gets you a great answer, which then transforms your thinking and your feeling and your acting. So the way I look at it is, with that statement, is that a great question literally can change the trajectory of your life. I'm heading this way in my health, and I sit down with somebody and I say, I've had this pattern of my life in my health or an addiction or whatever, and I need help. Will you help me? Or will you analyze what's going on with me? And it's not always how you word it and how fancy it is. A great question is just simply that, a transformative question, because the answer to it is what holds the power for us, and we can change the whole direction of our life. And that we've just seen that all throughout history. We see it in the Bible. Jesus, even if where you're at in the faith spectrum, let's say you don't know where you're at on the faith spectrum, is Jesus God, whatever. But we know historically that he was a Jewish rabbi that actually lived, and that's indisputable. Well, okay, we know that the Bible is largely historical, recapturing or capturing of moments that he had. And he's famous, Jesus is famous for many times answering a question with a question.
Yeah.
And his question was transformative, because it literally took the original question and he answered it with a question, but by throwing it back at them and framing up their question, we're talking about changing lives. So I'm not being romantic with that quote. I really do believe that a great question, and here's how I would define it real quick.
Yeah.
A great question means I'm going about 3 or 4 levels deeper than a good question. I'm trying to get to really down to the very heart of it. So, for instance, Chris, I don't know if you're a parent. I'm a parent, and I'm trying to figure this out. I got 3 kids. And I've figured out so far that when my kids act up or they're hurt, they're angry. Let's take those 2 emotions. Those are the 2 biggest ones we deal with as parents.
Sure.
I've got to ask a great question to get to the bottom of it. Because if I just ask a good question or just a lazy question, I'm not going to get to the bottom of why they're hurt or angry. I'm going to get symptomatic stuff. I'm going to get a part of the story. But when we dive deep as parents or as educators or as leaders, a great question is a scalpel, and it goes way down deep, and we see what the problem is. We're not looking for the surface wound or the surface pain. I want to know what's causing the pain in my left shoulder.
Yeah.
And you think about it, that's what doctors do. They ask great questions. They keep going deeper, deeper, deeper. And here's the deal. Good questions sometimes will lead to a great question. So when you don't have a great question, don't let that intimidate you. Ask about 7 good questions, and somewhere in there, you're going to pull up the great question, because that's what defines a great question. The ultimate source. It reveals the ultimate source of what you're looking for.
Man. And right there, Ken, I believe you just gave some tools that can save a relationship, because folks, you know that the fundamental focus of a relationship should be connection, not simply communicating. And so, Ken, let's take this even deeper. Here at Win today, a lot of people are worn out and they're stressed out, and they may feel unsuccessful in an area or 2 or 3 of life. And so what I hear you saying is that mastering the art of connecting with people is really going to require a lot of empathy, fostered by authenticity and founded by trust. That's going to require intention. That's going to require focus. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the very act of being intentional in a relationship, of asking multiple questions and getting to the bottom of your spouse's pain or frustration or anger, or your kids or your coworkers or your friends, your brother, your sister-in-law, brother-in-law, it doesn't matter. The very act of asking questions to get to the bottom of it, think about it. You're not making any statements.
Right.
You're just asking them. And so now they are in charge. You're not presenting a statement that they have to accept or reject. You're asking them. And the very posture of asking questions creates empathy.
Yes.
Because anybody that has any sensibilities at all goes, well, at least Chris has got enough empathy in his life, or at least some compassion, that he's asking me how I feel, why I feel that way, what did I do, how can I do it better. And that's a wonderful, wonderful way to come across, as opposed to making a statement. So again, just the very nature of a question is so much more powerful than a statement.
Yeah. Well, here's a practical example to that point. Today, Ken, I received a message from a friend, and she said, Chris, I'm working in this particular career, but I have these passion points and these skills that point to something totally different. How do I get from where I am to where I want to be? So let's talk about calling for a moment. In the book, Ken, you talk about passion plus talent equals calling. So speak to the difference makers. Let's unpack this even further. What would you have to say to them?
Yeah. So, again, every human being, I think, has 4 key elements if we were to break them apart. 1 is talent. That's what you do best. 2 is passion. That's what you love to do most. 3 is values. That's what matters most to me. In other words, it's the results I want to see most. And then the 4th piece is personality, which is essentially, the way I like to describe personality is that's our default wiring. So it's just the way you're wired. I'm wired differently than you are, but there are 8 billion people on the planet, so that means there's a couple million people wired like me. Very similar. So we see this all the time as in companies like Ramsey Solutions. Everybody has a personality profile. We do the DISC profile here. So somewhere in the 700 plus people in the building here, somebody has a very similar personality profile as me. It's not exact, but it's pretty darn close. But that's our default wiring. That doesn't, again, indicate a whole lot about what our calling is. It's just how we are when we're squeezed, how we are when we're happy, those kinds of things. So the formula for really understanding what your calling is understanding, well, wait a second, I have a creator, and he created me with unique strengths and talents and skills we develop from our talents.
Yeah.
And then every one of us has work that when we're engaged in it, that time stands still and we are energized by it. The thought of it quickens our heart. The act of being in it makes us feel so alive. Now, some people have never experienced it, but I'm telling you, everybody has passions. One of the ways I help our callers on the Ken Coleman Show begin to discover this is, what problem, this is a couple questions. What problem do you most want to solve? So you're looking for what moves my heart.
Yeah.
What solution do you most want to provide? Another way of saying it. And then what people or who do you most want to help? What do they look like? What's their problem? What do they feel like? So that's the basic construct, and we keep it simple because I think people understand that. And again, how does it come together? Well, your purpose is being fulfilled when you are using your top talents to perform your great passions.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And see, the values plays out. So, you're using your top talent to perform the work the work you love to do most for the results that you care about most. So that's where talent, passion, values all come together. And that person who's experiencing what I just described is certainly living their calling. They are doing what they were created to do.
And I'll say that living what we're created to do is definitely not an obstacle-free journey. In fact, it's probably not a safe journey in many ways. So, Ken, I'd love to know, how has fear shaped you as a leader? Fear of rejection, fear of failure. I believe our greatest dream is right beyond our greatest fear.
Yeah, absolutely. So fear of failure, and you can dissect that 80 different ways. But I think I had the same fears early on, and at times this pops up. I'm really good at just going, that's bad, that's stupid, that's a lie, and I ignore it and I move on. But I would say in the early days on this journey, I was afraid of people, thinking that I was egotistical or thinking that I was crazy for pursuing this, because it was a real departure from where I had been, and it was a long journey. And honestly, the odds were against me. I mean, my story, the odds were against me. I had so many people tell me, even close friends, that I was too old. So I had a fear of, that's the peer pressure. So fear of people, and then just the failure financially, the wasted time, embarrassing your wife, all that kind of stuff. So you can bundle all that together. But I had those same fears. I'll tell you this: I did believe I had what it took.
Okay.
I never wavered that I had the talent. I just wondered if it was too late. Would people see it? Would I be able to stay the course? I had those kind of fears.
Two of the greatest fear messages in my own life are "it's too late" and "I'm too late." Ken, what does this look like in your daily life? How do you work against these fears? What do you do in your daily habits and practices to mitigate the effects of fear?
I had to have a couple of checks in place. One was key people that I trusted and I knew were telling me the truth. So I would get anxious and I would get doubt and all that fear coming my way. Have I lost my mind? Am I crazy? My wife was one person that I would go to first. She was the most supportive person, stayed with me on the journey, and I knew she was telling me the truth. I never thought that it was just she's trying to make me feel good. And first of all, I knew she wasn't, because I was so committed that she knew if I failed, it was going to hurt us.
Sure.
So, she really felt like, hey, this is worth doing, because we were sacrificing so tremendously to be where I needed to be to do what I wanted to do. So my wife, I had 3 really close friends that I could call up and say, hey, have I lost my mind? Do you think I have what it takes? Yeah. I'd literally say that. Please tell me I've not lost my mind. Please, are you telling me? I know you told me this 6 weeks ago, but were you honest with me 6 weeks ago? I'm recalling conversations like that. And so that's huge. And then, of course, the Lord. I was, every morning, quiet time, the days that I was really doubtful, I was in scripture that dealt with doubt, and I knew I was under attack. Yeah. I knew that that the enemy wants to knock me off the path. He wants to keep us on the sideline. People make the devil like this big scary person, and I think he pretty much is. I don't want to jack with him, but I will say this. I think his greatest weapon, and I think his biggest goal, is not to kill us or hurt us, I think it's to sideline us. Yeah. I think it's to keep us on the sidelines. I think it's to keep us on the bleachers of life. Christians are harmless on the bleachers. We're just like, yay, that's nice. And did we bring the orange slices for the kids? And we're just spectators, right?
Yeah, it's true.
I'm serious about this.
Yeah.
I really believe this, that America's churches are like big, giant bleachers. And he's really cool with us being spectators. So how does he do that? Doubt. Yeah. Fear. Yeah. Rejection. I think he's the orchestrator of rejection. I think he's the orchestrator of doubt. I think he's the orchestrator of fear. Those are the 3 biggies. So fear is, I'm afraid of physical, financial harm. That's that lizard brain at the back of our heads. It controls our fight or flight. Right. Psychologists, by the way, discovered this in the 50s, not the 1950s. And then doubt is different. Doubt is in our head. We're not afraid. I don't think I've got what it takes. Yeah. I think I'm crazy. And then rejection is where, obviously someone tells us no, or even goes deeper and says you don't have what it takes. So those are the 3 biggies. And so what I did practically was I've got real feedback from people who are objective, who I trust, who could essentially verbally slap me across the face. Yeah. It's like that. You need that. You've seen the technique. People that go into panic mode sometimes, somebody who knows what they're doing, would literally just cuff them right across the face, not to hurt them, but to literally, it's like snap out of it. And so you need that in your life. Then obviously you've got to get into the word. In my mind, I'm a person of faith. So I'm going, okay, what does the Bible say about this? What am I facing? So once I knew that the enemy was out there putting these things in my head, now all of a sudden I go, oh, wait a second. Now I switch my doubt and fear to the voice in my head, and I got to get the right voices in my head. And so that's a spiritual grounding. Then the third thing is the facts. So I think it's really important for people, Chris, that when they're facing a constant voice of negativity, to write down the most insecure thoughts you have, the most frequent insecure thoughts that you have. That's good. The most frequent fearful thoughts that you have. Now, your listeners, I want them to do this. Write them down. So, okay, I get this thought about fear. This is the fear. These are my top fear thoughts, and I get these the most. Write them down. Insecurity or anxiety, whatever, and self-doubt thoughts. Write those down. Now, when you're in a healthy space, you look at those thoughts, and I want you to, below them or beside them, write the actual true thought. Because when we're in the midst of the thoughts, it's hard to be objective, isn't it?
Oh, it's so true.
But when we're in a healthy space, let's look at the thoughts and go, okay, this is what I think most about myself from a standpoint of insecurity or doubt. Now I'm going to write the true thought right here. And that's the truth. And I'm verifying that with good friends and my own honest common sense when I'm in a healthy space. And so what happens is when those thoughts actually come up, and they start to feel so real and so true, you go, wait a second, I'm going to go back to these people. I'm going to go back to the Bible. I'm going to go back to my list, and I'm going to look at what I wrote down as a true statement. I'm going to go, that's crap. That's not real.
Yeah.
That's a complete lie. And that right there, that was my technique, and I think that would work for most people. But you shine the light on the lie. And so the antidote to fear and doubt and rejection is truth.
And I'll just put myself on the chopping block, Ken, because my single greatest vice in life is the fear of rejection. And what it does is it keeps me in the posture of, and folks, we've talked about this for hours and hours and hours here on Win Today, but Ken, it has kept me in this posture of ready, aim, 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 and to use your...
Okay, so let's break this down.
Good.
Let's break this down since you put yourself on the block.
Sure.
If you're comfortable with this, tell your audience what has been a massive rejection or two in your life to this point.
Looking back into my childhood, there were a handful of very specific instances that, as a little boy, left me very emotionally vulnerable and really full of shame. I don't want to get into the details of what those were specifically, but it left me honestly questioning whether or not inherently I have what it takes. And so the fear of failure and the fear of rejection has kept me going, you know what? I'm not sure if this is worth the risk.
Yeah, you don't want to feel that again.
Correct.
So you have to look at that, and you own that, and you've talked about it obviously on this podcast with your audience.
Sure.
And that's huge. And that's the first step in getting beyond that, is actually acknowledging the source of all of your other fears of rejection. It starts there, and that's a wound, and that's not your fault. But the reality is what's the opposite? So if that's a lie, that you are somebody worthy of rejecting and you're not good enough and your dad left you because he didn't love you and you're not good enough, whatever it was, that gets transferred into other areas. And so if you put yourself out there in a relationship, or you put yourself out there as a speaker, because all of a sudden you're the product. And so if somebody doesn't like your talk, or somebody doesn't buy your book, the audience rejected me. And you don't want to, you're really not worried about being rejected. You're worried about feeling that feeling again.
Correct.
That's the issue.
Correct.
Right. And so what happens is we go, all right, so now let's reverse engineer that. So what I'm really afraid of is feeling that way again. So what causes me to feel that way? Well, what causes me to feel that way is to believe a lie.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then what it does is puts us in this performance acceptance trap.
Exactly. So we overcompensate in some areas, and then what we have to realize is, wait a second, the feeling that I felt is a lie.
Yes.
Now, it was very real. And I mean, it's excruciating, and it hurts. And it's devastating. But it's a lie. And so when you begin to feel that going forward, you got to go, wait a second, this is all a lie. This is all a lie. This is a complete lie, and I'm an idiot. It's a complete lie.
Yep.
But let me say this, because I think this is important. This is so minuscule, but I'm gonna say it and share it.
Great.
Because I think it's important. I had a guy reach out. I had a guy who doesn't follow me on Twitter recently. He's got 32 followers. His Twitter feed is overwhelmingly negative. And he, like I said, doesn't follow me, so he's not what I would call somebody who's a fan or of the show. But he tweeted something about my show, and it was just like, It was not even hateful. It was just mildly critical about the show. And it was something to the effect of, is it me or is every other call a rerun on the Ken Coleman Show? Now, I know what he means, but if you listen to the Dave Ramsey Show, every call is basically one of 4 or 5 calls every day.
Oh,
but the world's a big place and they all have a similar problem.
Yep.
But it took me about 5 to 7 minutes to realize that it's true about my show too. But here's a guy with 32 followers, and Chris, I was this close to tweeting something snarky at this guy. Now he's got 32 followers, and he purposely mentioned me on Twitter. He wanted to take a shot at me.
Yes.
Chris, does he know me personally?
Oh, absolutely not.
No. Do you think he's bought into what I'm doing?
Not a chance.
Well, why do you think, Chris, that he decided to do that? What do you think? Take a shot.
He's probably just a critical guy.
He's a critic, right?
Right.
I don't know why he's a critic, but I spent 10 minutes of my life stewing over that comment.
Yeah.
Why? Because at the end of the day, I still fight this desire to please everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm the product. It's not the Career Life Show. It's the Ken Coleman Show. I'm the product.
Yeah.
I took it personal. Now, I got mature, and I didn't reply, I didn't block him. I just let it go. But I'm sharing this story because I needed to share this story with you and your audience, because here's the deal. That speaks to one of my fears. That one comment from one guy who has no context, he's probably not happy in his life. I probably could actually help him. He took a shot at me. Why? I don't know. But here's the deal. It's played to one of my fears. The fear of not being good enough. Which, by the way, 8 billion people, however many people on the planet, we all have that. We have 2 major fears. Am I good enough? Am I lovable? So I just want to say sometimes, I don't want to put myself up on a pedestal. I want to say that I still struggle with the stupidest things like that. And so what's the truth, Chris? So back to my analogy, what's the truth? That's not true.
Right.
Every other call is not a rerun. These are real people live, right, calling in. And that's the nature of the beast. That's what I do. I'm helping a lot of people who have very similar problems. And so every show is very similar. And I'm doing work that God's called me to do. And oh, by the way, the show's working. And I'm helping people. Why in the crap am I worried about one critic with 32 followers on Twitter? Why? So there you go. I mean, my point is, when an anxiety or a fear or a rejection, he rejected me. That's what that was. He rejected my show. And it comes at me, and I don't want to be rejected, and I've been rejected. And it sucks.
Yeah, it does.
But what do I have to do in that moment? I have to shine the light of truth on my feeling, which isn't a fact. Your feelings aren't facts. Fear is not a fact. It's a feeling. And so we have to understand that. So I know we've beat that to death, but I think there's so many people that deal with that. And it's been liberating for me that I can actually talk myself out of a funk instead of go sit down with Mackenzie, my publicist, and tell her. And she'd look at me and go, "For real, dude?" That's what she would have said. "For real? Yeah. You're worried about that?" And you know what I mean?
Oh,
but by the way, that's great. If I can't talk myself out of it, I need people like that in my life so that I could go to her and she's going to go, "Bro, seriously?"
Yep.
And then I feel silly. And as I should. So anyway,
wow.
I think that's really important. I wanted to share that. So there you go. There's some authenticity right there. It's just only a couple days old.
It's so good, Ken. And I mean, I'm sitting here, Ken, I'm taking notes, and then I'm going, oh my gosh, we just hit this thing to the left field, because it's so necessary to go here in communication and just let the cat out of the bag and say, hey, we all struggle. And here's the thing, folks, I like to teach and connect. And so let's even take what Ken just said and connect that to the earlier part of the conversation about asking questions. Mm-hmm. Ken, we're both Christians. We serve the Lord. And so what did David do throughout the Psalms? He asked his soul questions. So I want to propose, Ken, based on what you just said, then the art of asking questions needs to be applied to ourselves. Why in the world are we believing this? What is the limiting belief? What is the right?
That's right. Well, that's exactly what it is. What's the limiting belief? That's the little silly story I just shared. I had a limiting belief there. That was like, oh, everybody doesn't like me. I must not be doing good enough. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. And listen, when you're living out loud, you're going to have critics. And you're going to have moments like that where you allow another voice to knock you off for a little bit. And so, yeah, we all have limiting beliefs. The reason I share this story is because we don't ever outgrow it.
Yes. That's so important to note. And, Ken, at some point while we're landing the plane on our conversation today, once we get to this place of asking ourselves questions and assessing and doing the back end preparation, we then have to step out on the fear. No matter what it feels like, we have to be decisive. In fact, the crux of your advice, I think, Ken, can be distilled down to 2 words: get going. So closing moments here with you. How do we break this stranglehold of indecision then? For us cautious people, what do we do?
You just do. At some point, the analysis of paralysis can only be broken by, stepping out, making some decision. If you feel like you're locked up on a big decision, then I think a practical step is to make a smaller decision.
Yeah.
So I faced a million of these early on because I was trying to figure out how in the world am I going to become a full-time broadcaster and make the money that I'm making with my business. I was making 6 figures, so this was not some easy mountain to climb. And I'm going, okay. And so what I did was I didn't say I'm going to go try to get a job in New York. That's a crazy decision that would have locked me up. I'd have never been able to make it. You know what I did, though? I said, I'm going to go take a broadcasting school. I'm going to do an 8-week broadcasting school here in Atlanta with a bunch of 20-year-olds.
Oh, my gosh.
So I think the practical answer is decide to do something. And if it is such a scary decision, make a lesser decision. Yeah. And momentum is what you're going for here.
Ken, were there ever moments you're laying in bed at night with your wife and you've got this passion, this purpose, this potential in you, and you're chasing the dream and you're wondering, I know I have what it takes, but I'm not sure this is going to work out, or rather, I don't see how this is going to work out. Was it?
Well, I made decisions that were smaller so that I could answer the question, am I going to die if I do this? Are we going to starve?
Right.
Am I going to be homeless? And so by doing something a little bit smaller and having some questions like that, just to snap you out of your fear, then really the risk isn't as big as you think it is. So we talk about this in the book, One Question. The chapter with Jim Collins is worth the entire book because he frames this entire thing we're talking about right now, which is people aren't scared of risk. They're scared of the unknown. Big difference. If I say to you, Chris, hey, let's go whitewater rafting, or let's go do some combat thing, or let's go do a mud run or some Titan run or whatever, and we know, hey, I could get bruised, I could have an injury to my leg, but I'm not going to die. But if I say, let's go, jump out of a plane and we're not sure if the chute's going to open, or we're going to go cave diving and I can't see 2 feet in front of me, I'm going to be horrified of that because I don't know what's in the cave.
Yeah.
So we're more afraid of the unknown than we are of the actual risk. If you can mitigate all of the factors and you calculate the risk, well, then there's not much to be afraid of. But that's what many times we don't calculate. We just see a risk and we go, oh, I don't want to do that. And we back off the ledge, as opposed to what are the 6 things I need to do that are going to take the fear away because I know all of the risk and I've mitigated for it. And I'm willing to get a couple bumps and bruises because that's not that big a deal. Let's go. Yeehaw. And then we jump.
That's good. That's good. Well, Ken, my greatest passion here is to help people design a roadmap to wholeness. And so you've provided so much inspiration and information today that I think can be applied. But I'd love for you to just distill today's conversation down. Give us some actionable items that we can apply today and even next week to say, I'm going for this thing. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I think I would say that you need to ask yourself, am I growing? And I would break it down into a few key areas of your life. Am I growing professionally? Am I growing personally as it relates to my relationships? If spirituality, if faith is a part of your journey, physically, because you got to take care of yourself. Your body is what's going to give you the longevity. And so, personally, professionally, and then break down the personal into those other key areas. Am I growing as a parent? Am I growing as a spouse? Am I growing as a brother, a son? Just keep breaking it down. And I think you have to be consistently asking yourself, am I growing? And if you can look at yourself honestly and say, no, I'm not growing, then the answer is because you're not learning. So Now ask yourself, what do I need to learn as a parent? What do I need to learn as a spouse? What do I need to learn as a leader? And it's real simple. So I would break it down to that advice right there, because the people who are intentional to learn are the ones that are going to grow. And, and I'll say this, self-awareness is huge. That's why I gave you that advice right there.
Correct.
You need to be able to self-assess and then run it by some people who know you well. So make your list, self-assess, and run it by some people who know you, and they're going to give you the true answer. Then you square your answers and go, okay, this is where I need to grow, so I better get started learning.
That's so good, so solid. Folks, he is Ken Coleman. He is the host of the EntreLeadership podcast and the Ken Coleman Show, as well as the author of the book, One Question. Ken, this has really been a treat. I'm so grateful for your time, for your wisdom. I know a lot of my listeners listen to you, so you're a familiar voice here at Win Today, but I just want to thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a fun time, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I want to encourage you to keep doing it. You're doing a great job.
Thanks, Ken. You know, there are some people in life that are just straight shooters, and they pull on the very core of our being, but it's good because it shakes us from mediocrity and complacency. I'm so stirred up after that conversation with Ken. Guys, please connect with Ken. He's on Twitter at Ken Coleman. He's the host of the Ken Coleman Show on Sirius XM Radio, also on Apple Podcasts. He's also the host of the highly acclaimed EntreLeadership podcast, which is a Dave Ramsey brand, jam-packed every week with leadership goodness. I've been a listener for over 3 years. I don't miss an episode. Really good stuff. You can also connect with him at kencolemanshow.com. As for his book, One Question, go to wintoday.tv/episode 94 right now. I'll have a link in the show notes to purchase it. But up next on this week's Mentoring Minute, my good friend George Wells, host of the Elevate Your Impact podcast, is here. He's really adding to the conversation we had with Ken, and he's talking all about feeding our fears. Let's get right to it. Here's George Wells from Elevate Your Impact.
What are your fears and what are your fantasies? For years, Sunday evening, when I worked in corporate and when I was going to school and college, Sunday evenings I would dread. I would think about all the things that I had to do that week. I would feel overwhelmed. Oftentimes I'd get a headache. I wouldn't sleep that well until I came up with a solution. Writing down your fears, writing down all of the things. What is it that's on your mind? Just write them down. And also, here's another key that no one ever really talks about that much. What are the things that you're most excited about? I say the fantasies, the fears and the fantasies. And this is what you do. Take a blank piece of paper and write down on the left side of the column all the things that you fear happening, the things that you're thinking about that are going to happen today, in the future, this week, and then also further in the future. And then in the center column, write down, why is it that I'm fearing that? What is it about that I'm fearful of? And then in the right side of the column, write, if that happens, then what is going to happen? This is so powerful because what it does is it takes away the power of those fears, because you think, well, some you may think, you know what, that's probably not even going to happen. That's not that big a deal. And then other things you think, well, if it does happen, then this is going to happen, this is happening, you know what, that'll be fine. And then other things you may think, man, that's a real big deal. That is a big deal. I need to do everything I can to be taking care of that situation. Then on another piece of paper, write down your fantasies, the things that you're most excited about. Maybe you're going to a ball game on Wednesday. Maybe this weekend you're going to a party and you're looking forward to it. Write those things down, because that then gives you hope. Think about, in the center column then, write down why it is that you're excited about them. Well, I'm going to see an old friend that I haven't seen for a while. I'm looking forward to them being there. Okay, well, why is it you're looking forward to being there? Oh, I remember. I want to tell them the story about something that happened 6 months ago. Just lay it all out. Laying all of that out, it'll just take you a few minutes. And the things that you fear, it'll take away a lot of the power of those fears. And the things that you're excited about, it will encourage those things and get you even more excited about getting through the week. It might even get you excited about doing those things that you're not looking forward to doing, so that you can get on to the good stuff. Until we meet again.
Guys, you hear me say this so often. We have one life to live, but fear is so insidious. Shame is so devastating in our life, but we tolerate it. So many of us walk through life and just believe every thought that goes through our head, and we don't take stock in the thoughts that we're thinking. And what ends up happening, we end up living out of this untruth that's happening inside our minds. That's no way to live. I have done it for so long. I'm done. I'm so tired of it. But guys, I'm so grateful. That was George Wells, host of the brand new podcast, Elevate Your Impact. Get it right now on iTunes. Here's the deal. The show is only 2 minutes long, 3 at the most. So here's my morning routine. I get up, and in the time it takes for me to make my bed, I've listened to George's words for the day. It releases Monday through Friday on iTunes. It's so good. Special thanks to Ken Coleman, of course, for this power-packed conversation we had today. Please do connect with him. The Ken Coleman Show is on Apple Podcasts. You can get them on Sirius XM radio as well. And like I had mentioned, the EntreLeadership podcast is one you do not want to miss. Folks, thanks for joining in this conversation. I'm so grateful for your listenership. I'm so grateful that you have decided to join this conversation. It's why I told you at the beginning of the show, I want to add value to your life. So call me right now, 248-266-2945. That's 248-266-2945. We'll talk relationships and communication, getting unstuck, putting a plan on your dreams, and everything in between. Ask me your questions. I'll answer them on the show. It'll be really great. But hey, until next week, visit me over at wintoday.tv for blog posts and archive podcasts, all aimed at helping you design your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. Come say hi on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at 00ChrisCook. Lots of cool stuff happening there. I hope you have an awesome week. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.